Hello everyone, welcome to part 1 of my Outlast 2 Insane Difficulty, No Batteries walkthrough. And this is going to be chapters 1, 2, and 3. And yeah guys, I've had to split this into parts because unfortunately this game is way longer than an hour. And I can only do a maximum of 1 hour for my videos on Share Factory, which is very unfortunate. And it sucks, because I really feel like that this game has way too many sections that are completely unnecessary, that I really feel need to have been trimmed out from the game. And I know I said before I wasn't going to do this restriction of not reloading my camcorder, but I don't know, it just kind of became a habit for me. I just had the desire to do it for some reason, as if it was just the best way to do it. And it was very easy to do, especially considering that I maxed out on my settings for my TV, where I turned up my brightness and contrast settings so that the game would just be incredibly bright. So you're going to be seeing a lot of moments where I'm not using the camcorder and I'm just somehow navigating through very dark areas. But there is a lot to say about Outlast 2, and Outlast 2 is a really bad game. I mean, it has some cool designs, but there is just a lot of really annoying designs that Outlast 2 favors when it comes to certain like section designs, enemy designs, and just really tedious mechanics. And right now we're being introduced to the whole stamina system, so unlike Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC, Outlast 2 has a stamina bar where if you max out on your stamina, you are going to go into a stamina penalty where your screen will shake and you won't be able to move a great distance, and it'll get to the point where you'll just be unable to run, and you'll give the enemies the advantage of catching up to you. And the enemies have no kind of stamina penalty system on this game, and they run at light speed to accommodate for the fact that you run very fast. But I think there are far more interesting ways it could have made the enemies very dangerous and still catch up to you without the need to make them run at light speed, because that just feels like a very big artificial handicap. It's the same case with like Lickers from Resident Evil 2 Remake, where Lickers ran at light speed on hardcore difficulty to catch up to you, and the movement animation that they did not properly complement the speed at which they were moving. It's funny because Outlast 1 had a very similar case like this, where Traeger would actually be walking, but the speed at which he was moving did not complement his walking animation, so it looked like he was just gliding while he was walking. And you didn't really notice it in my walkthrough because there wasn't really a situation where I was letting Traeger walk. I was just running with him because, as I mentioned before in my Outlast 1 walkthrough, the stealth in the Outlast series is not very good because you just don't have a lot of stealth options at your disposal. Your only stealth option is to hide and let the enemies do whatever they so choose, and it's just not the best way you want to play this game because the AI can be very omniscient and there's no telling where they'll go. And if there was an option to at least use distractions in the environment, that would make a lot more sense, because if you're not going to give the main character the ability to fight back, you at least should make it so that he has the capabilities necessary to avoid the enemies in specific ways that actually feel logical. But Red Barrels doesn't favor such options with the Outlast series whatsoever.
Okay.
And you'll see right here, this is a section that comes across as being a section you're supposed to stealth, but I'm just going to run past every single enemy because it's very easy to do. So you need to run this way, hug the right-hand side because there's a guy very close to the building, and he comes very close to hitting me somehow. And that's something I need to discuss as well. The enemies on this game utilize a parry animation system for attacking, rather than a hitbox-based system that Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC had, where when the enemies attacked, they did not glide forward, they just stood still to do their attack, and it was very easy to get past them. Well, on this game, the enemies glide towards you, which is what's normally expected from a paired animation system, and it can be very annoying because it gives the enemies more range than they perhaps should, and it just looks very weird that they're just able to glide towards you with their attacks. And there are a couple ways of bypassing this. You have the ability to slide on this game, and the slide does allow you to move very quickly through the environment, and it allows you to get through low spaces very quickly. And you can also use it to dodge. So if you time your slide properly, during the slide animation, the enemies will try to do an attack, but it'll be aimed at chest height rather than at the ground because they still think you're in a standing position. And you can use this to get past them, but you have to be very quick when it comes to recovering from the animation because the enemies are very quick to attack you if you miss time when you're supposed to slide. The other option you have at your disposal is going prone. If you go prone at the right moment, you will be able to dodge the enemy's attack. And in certain situations, it's a lot better than sliding, because there are a lot of environments in the game that feel very narrow, and it can be very hard to slide past the enemies. And when you are trying to use the slide, you have to make sure you slide right past them in order to ensure that they don't hit you too quickly. Whereas with the prone, you don't have to worry about getting behind them, because if you mash L1 during the prone animation, Blake will stand up very quickly, and you'll be able to run past the enemy very quickly. And I'm going to demonstrate it in a couple of situations, but that won't be for a while, because there's really not a lot of gameplay to Outlast 2, and that's one of my biggest criticisms with this game. It has a very odd choice for pacing, and I don't know why Red Barrels got so poor with their choice of pacing in this game, but you're going to be spending more time in cutscenes, in walking moments, and in sequences where you're just not doing anything than you will be actually engaging the enemies. Like, look at this encounter right here. There's only a couple of enemies, and all I'm doing is just running past the enemies. That's the case with most of the encounters in Outlast 2. And Chapter 1 is an incredibly simple chapter. There are some very bullcrap chapters, like Chapter 2. Like, Chapter 2 is honestly the worst chapter on this game, because the AI cheats all the time, and there are a lot of situations where you're just in cutscenes and you're not doing anything, and unfortunately, the cutscenes on this game are completely unskippable. So, if you die on insane difficulty, you have to go back to the very beginning of the game and watch all of those unskippable cutscenes. And the thing I find very confusing about insane difficulty on this game is that the developers didn't seem to have the same mentality that they had when they were designing insane difficulty for Outlast 1 and Outlast the Whistleblower DLC. In Outlast 1 and also in the Whistleblower DLC, insane difficulty gave you one checkpoint. In Outlast 1, it was after the prologue sequence where you're just in the car and you're driving up to Mount Massive Asylum. In Outlast the Whistleblower DLC, they gave you a checkpoint after the sequence where you're just going through that lab. And I think that was really good because it ensures you're not having to waste time getting back into the game if you're wanting to retry insane difficulty. But for some reason, they didn't do that with Outlast 2. Every time you die on insane difficulty, you have to go through that stupid prologue sequence where you're in the helicopter and you're just having that conversation with Lynn, and then you have to do that walking sequence and then witness that hallucination. And it's just padding for no other reason other than to make insane difficulty very tedious and just not very replayable. If they gave you the checkpoint after you lifted that helicopter door off of you, then it would be a little bit more acceptable. But even still, though, with the amount of downtime you're in Outlast 2, it makes insane difficulty incredibly annoying, and I don't consider insane difficulty difficult on this game. I just consider it to be very tedious and just not properly designed. And if they actually trimmed out a lot of the unnecessary moments where you're in cutscenes and you're not having to do so many walking moments, then maybe insane difficulty would be tolerable on this game. But as it stands right now, this is really as large as the encounters are going to be, and as you'll see right there, I just ran past those enemies. I mean, Outlast 2 is very rigid in how it wants you to do the sections. I mean, in Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC, the game did offer you a little bit more flexibility with how it wanted you to approach the sections. But in Outlast 2, if you deviate from what the game expects you to do, you're going to get into a lot of trouble when it comes to doing the sections on this game. And with how passive you have to be on insane difficulty, I need to resort to strategies like this, where I need to be incredibly stealthy and just wait for the enemies to do their things. And if this game actually had a distraction mechanic, as is the case with a lot of stealth games, I wouldn't have to wait so long for these enemies to do their thing. But the good news is these enemies here, they're on a scripted path. You need to wait for them to either go through the door you came through, or to go in that direction. And I sped up that whole entire encounter just then, and now is my chance to move, and you need to move this structure over to this ladder. And it will make noise, and that is a new mechanic. They've put in a system where the enemies can be aware of any noises, and that's why you heard that sound effect just then. But it doesn't really change up the encounter that much. In fact, you don't want to ever put yourself in a situation where you will make noise, because the enemies do some very weird pathing whenever they hear the noise. But moving on to a couple of new features that Outlast 2 embraces. I've already described some of them, but the Camcorder has received an upgrade in this game. So, the night vision on one single battery lasts longer than in Outlast 1 and in Outlast the Whistleblower DLC. The Camcorder also comes with a built-in microphone that can be used to track the positions of enemies, and it even works through walls. So if you use the microphone, you see a bunch of bars that indicate left and right, and depending on which bar is larger, you'll know it's coming from either the left or from the right. And also, it doesn't drain your battery. Originally, at launch, the microphone would drain your battery, but they changed that, so it no longer drains your battery, even on the harder difficulties. You can also use the microphone as a way of muffling music volume so that you can track other sound effects, and it makes it easier to pinpoint enemies. So overall, the microphone is a decent feature. I don't really use it that much. I mean, I only use it during like 1 or 2 sections, and it's definitely handy against Marta before you make it into the church, so that you can track down where Marta is in order to implement a strategy that I use against her. But other than those kind of sections, I don't use it that much. And going back to the tangent on the microphone getting a change where it no longer drains your battery, Outlast 2 actually had a lot of portions changed, and Chapter 2 is actually the chapter that's changed the most after these patches. And I never thought a game would ever add or delete certain parts of the game. Like for instance, they've added new enemies in areas that they weren't in previously, and then they've also removed certain sections where, for instance, Nick and Laird are trying to kill an enemy, or they've removed certain enemies from certain areas, and it makes the game flow better, and it makes the sections a lot better in their designs. And I'm glad that they did that. Like, they even removed a jump scare from the game. And I never thought that a game that embraces as many jump scares as it does would ever remove a single jump scare. And the jump scare in question is when you fall down on Jessica's corpse and Father Lulymilch is right in front of you. So you run away, and then when you retreat into the bathroom and he starts singing, you open the door, and normally it's supposed to trigger a jump scare where he starts chasing you, but they've removed that. And I think they only did that because Father Lulymilch says lines as you're running away from him, and I think they wanted the players the chance to actually hear his lines, so they removed him from the chase sequence, so you're not being chased by anyone after you open the bathroom door. And that kind of represents the overall changes that they've made to the game. And I never thought any game would ever take as drastic of changes as this game. Oh, and by the way, you're going to be seeing me use an exploit here. So, if you jump backwards and you hold square to interact with something, weird things happen. For some reason, Blake's model can go through certain pieces of geometry. If you jump back and hold square in a particular way, you never want to go sideways, because oftentimes when you strafe sideways, or I'm sorry, if you jump sideways, the game puts you so far away from the interactable, and you can oftentimes clip through the geometry. And if you clip through the geometry, obviously you're going to have to restart the whole entire game or just fall through the world. And I do use this kind of out-of-bounds trick for doing a puzzle very quickly, but I only do that on any difficulty that's not insane difficulty, because I oftentimes clip through the geometry when trying to skip the puzzle. So I'll be taking the long way when it comes to doing that puzzle in Chapter 5, where you have to move that minecart in order to smash it through the wall. But going back to what I was saying originally about the number of changes that they made to this game, it's surprising. I've never seen any game do as many changes as Outlast 2. And when the changes represent some very big changes, such as adding and removing enemies or changing up certain sections, it feels very drastic for a patch. And I definitely feel like the patches benefited the overall flow of the game, and they made a lot of parts of the game a lot fairer. Like, you know, one section that I'm really glad has changed? There's a chase sequence with Val in Chapter 5, and Val is so quick to catch up to you. And when you make such sharp turns while you're sprinting, you slow down so much, and it's very bull crap. So what they did is they made it so that Val can no longer chase you when you jump across a certain gap, and that is really fair on the developer's part. In fact, since we touched a little bit on the sprinting, I think it's time to talk a bit about the sprinting, especially when we're now being chased by Marta, which if you do that path every time, she will never catch up to you. Also, do not try to look behind you while you're sprinting. It will slow you down. It's the same case in Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC. I don't know why it does this, but it's really dumb, and it definitely takes away a lot of the immersive aspect of the Outlast series. But sprinting on this game is a very tedious mechanic. The fact that you have to wait for such a long time for your stamina to regenerate is just there to artificially extend the length of the game. And if you end up going into a section too quickly without waiting for your stamina to regenerate, you're gonna get screwed easily. You know, like the last part of Chapter 2, where you need to gain access to that noose, you have to make sure you have a full sprint available to you, so that when you get to the noose, you're gonna always make sure you have full sprint. Oh, and this part right here, you have to point the camera in particular directions to actually move Blake. So the first turn, you have to point the camera to the right, and then after that point, just keep your camera moving to the left, and Blake will actually move. And you'll do that sequence. And the scripting on this section is very odd, because after you interact with the music box, you need to go back the way you came, listen for the door opening, and then turn around, and then continue on the path. I don't know why it does this. There's some really weird instances of scripting like that. Like in one school sequence, you have to turn on your night vision at the end of a hallway after the whole event where all the lockers are just opening by themselves stops in order to trigger a jump scare that will allow a door to be opened. And when jump scares are being used to script progress in a game, you definitely understand that this game is very over-reliant upon jump scares. And here is a lucky pass one because for some reason, this guy doesn't try to cut open Blake. He just decides to throw him down the stairs and just chase him. It's so dumb. Really, really dumb. And he says, "I'll bleed you in the yard," but he completely eviscerated that corpse in that room. It wasn't in the yard. Why was it different with Blake? You know, how am I supposed to care about my main protagonist if he's just getting all these lucky passes? How am I supposed to see any kind of evolution in this character when an invisible force is constantly saving him every time? You know, that's why I can never connect to these kind of characters in these kind of games. But we're now being chased, and the enemies are going to demonstrate that they can also go prone, and they can also crouch. They can do the same things that you can do aside from jumping, because only the heretics seem to be able to jump compared to these cultists. And whenever you're in these mandatory prone moments, the game is actually controlling you as long as you're pushing forward on the left analog stick. You do not have to move the left analog stick left or right to turn. The game automatically turns you, so you can use that to your advantage when it comes to saving up on your night vision. And once we're out here, just make a mad dash for that room over there. And I'm going to be demonstrating a method that I used in the first Outlast, where I'm just going to hide next to a door, wait for the guy to bust through, and because he gains a lot of forward momentum, I'm going to be able to get past him. And for some reason, he doesn't chase you when you go down the stairs. If you get down the stairs, he doesn't chase you. And when you get down the stairs, you're going to need to hide, and there are some bandages that you can pick up before you hide from the second guy that's in the room. But he breaks through. I go down here, and he doesn't follow me for some reason. Lucky pass, I guess. I pick up the bandage, and then I hide behind here because there's a guy in that room, and he's quick to attack you when you open the door. And I'm once again going to be using the exploit where I glitch through the furniture that's blocking the door so that I can open it very quickly. Or not even opening it, just get through the door because it turns off the hitbox on the furniture so I can just pass right through it. And you have to make sure you jump backwards. Jumping backwards always ensures that you're going to glitch through the furniture. I mean, even if I was to open that furniture normally, it wouldn't have changed the pacing of the section, because as long as you've locked that door, you can always get through it quickly, and the enemies never try to follow you into this tunnel. They just shut the furniture behind you for some reason. But going back to my tangent on sprinting, because I keep getting diverted from it, sprinting on this game is just a tedious mechanic. You have to wait for such a long time for your stamina to regenerate. The game recommends that you stand still to regenerate your stamina. Always make sure you have your stamina regenerated before a big encounter. And whenever you're making sharp turns with your sprint, it causes you to lose a lot of momentum, so you have to make sure you're taking very wide angles with your sprint if you want to ensure that your momentum isn't going to be lost. And I just think it's really dumb that they would design the sprint this way. Like, I think the sprint in the first Outlast was more than sufficient enough. And, you know, the enemies were already good at catching up to you on Outlast 1 and Outlast the Whistleblower DLC, and that's why you had to resort to a lot of, like, moments where you're having to jump over objects to ensure that the enemies are being very slow and getting to you. But instead, they opt for very fast enemies, and I just skip past that whole entire mandatory prone sequence. And we're going to jump up here, and you have to break open the floor. I'm amazed that Blake realizes he's supposed to do this. But I guess Blake's situational awareness is higher than normal, considering that he's just a journalist. You know, I've always found that very strange, how these journalists, like Wayland Park and Miles Upshur and Blake Langerman, they're able to be very agile when it comes to parkour, and that just seems very odd for a journalist to behave like that. Like, these guys could get Chris Redfield to run for his money. People complain so much about Chris Redfield's biceps. Well, why don't they voice the same complaints about these guys? These seemingly average individuals that are somehow capable of performing some very complex parkour maneuvers. At least Chris went through very intense training in order to develop the kind of muscles he has, in order to put him up to par with Wesker, because Wesker has superhuman strength. But these guys, they haven't gone through any kind of training, surely. And yet, they're somehow able to do all these very complex actions. It makes no sense. But of course, the fact that the developers favored those kind of attributes for the main characters causes the Outlast series to be the best horror simulator rather than just being your generic PC-esque horror simulator where the main character is just so slow and everything is just so unnecessarily slow and it doesn't feel very fast and frenetic, whereas the Outlast series at least does this. But it would be nice if the game gave some kind of justification as to why these characters are able to be as agile as they are without any kind of complex, like, exercise whatsoever. Oh, this section here, this is very important. Marta is incredibly bullcrap on this section because she's very omniscient, and she also has the ability to teleport whenever you lose sight of her. And that's why you need to make sure you remain in a combat status with her. What I'm going to do is after I push this wagon a certain distance, it'll trigger her quote. You need to get under here before she starts chasing you. That way you can trigger your last one position over here. And because my last one position is here, she's going to remain in a combat status for me the whole time, trying to get to me. She doesn't try to bust through any fences or teleport whenever I do this. And you need to use the microphone to track her position, so you want to turn around and place your camera in that direction, and you need to wait until the left bar is higher than the right bar. That way you know that Marta is off to the left. And because she's off to the left right now, she's not going to have enough time to get back over to where I am. And this will trivialize this section. I haven't seen anyone else do this method, and I think I'm the only one who's discovered this so far, but a lot of people will try to lure Marta back to the beginning of the area and just circle around her, but this is very dangerous to do because it opens her up to teleporting and just smashing through fences, and she will catch you a lot whenever you're trying to push the wagon, and this method saves so much time. And all we have to do now is just another unskippable moment where we're just watching bad stuff happen, and we're going to be seeing more of the medieval torture happening. And this really shows why the Outlast series is more violent than any other series out there, because the Outlast series tries to put a lot of pacing and a lot of detail into a lot of its violence, and this really goes far beyond the violence coefficient that a lot of games utilize nowadays. But that looked very bad just then. That animation that played when that guy was trying to cut into that guy, it looked really bad, and you didn't even see any kind of cuts going into him. And then the detail on the bones being pulled apart, it did not provide a lot of impact that the developers probably were expecting, so it just didn't look that good. But now that you've done that unskippable moment, which lasts way longer than it perhaps should, this door is now open and we can get over here. And this was actually a chase sequence originally at launch, but they decided to patch it out in this most recent patch. So I'm glad, because there are a lot of moments where the enemies catch up to you so quickly, and it could be very bullcrap a lot of the times. So removing the enemies from this section was definitely the best choice in order to ensure a more balanced experience. And we're very close to the end of Chapter 1. We just got a little bit of a skirmish with a couple of cultists before we have to deal with Marta again. And the skirmish is pretty easy to deal with because all you need to do is, upon first starting the encounter, you need to hug the left-hand side of the cornfield and just start moving. Although you want to make sure you're not using your sprint too much, because if you don't have a lot of sprint, then getting away from the cornfield is going to be tricky, and you'll most likely get spotted. And right now, the enemies are pretty close to me, but they're very slow to actually initiate combat with me. Like, you even heard the noise just then, indicating that enemy was aware of me, but he's so slow to actually get to me. So, try to move at a very fast pace, but not too fast. And I'm just using the time right now to regenerate my stamina, and as soon as I get over to that light right over there, that indicates the end of the cornfields right here, and I can start running. And we're just going to keep moving. There's a crank that you need to pick up before you actually progress onward with the sequence. And I don't know if the enemies are actually moving towards me right now while I'm doing these interactions, but assume they are, and just move at a very fast pace here. When you do shut off the mechanism with the crank, and then you try to crawl under it, you'll cause a mandatory spawn to occur where the enemies know exactly where you are, and they're going to come after you. It's all pretty simple. And something I gotta mention, whenever you're trying to go prone underneath objects at a very fast pace, you always want to sprint towards it and just tap circle, because Blake will automatically go prone, and he'll gain a lot of momentum while he does so, and it allows you to move very fast. So right here, I'm not holding the prone button, I tapped circle while I was sprinting, and Blake automatically went prone. It's a really nice system. It's the same case whenever you're trying to mantle over objects, because if you press X very early, Blake will actually glide towards the object he wants to mantle over and perform the action, and it's a really cool design because it allows the pacing of the chase sequences to not feel interrupted. Oh, this part right here, the method I'm about to employ against Marta in order to get past her very quickly is very dangerous. It works roughly 60% of the time, but what I did just then is as soon as she said a particular word, I dove to prone, and I hid behind this tree. There are times when she can spot you when you're over there, and I don't understand why it occurs, but if it happens, you're done for. There's nothing you can do. I just get very impatient with that section, and oftentimes Marta is very omniscient if you decide to go with the pacing of that area. Because I've had moments where I've been hiding in the grass, she's been going on her path, and then for some reason, she decided to go towards me, and she's ended up spotting me and killing me. And Marta will kill you instantly on Nightmare and Insane difficulty. You can't even use the dodge system against Marta on those difficulties, because she cancels whatever you're doing just to do a grab, and she will just destroy your genitalia with her pickaxe. And even on hard, when she doesn't do any kind of grab maneuver, she is able to hit you so perfectly that even when you do the slide or the prone against her, her swing is so vertical that she can hit you while you're on the ground. It's so dumb that it works like that. And I'm not a big fan of it whatsoever. But Marta is currently despawned, and she's only going to appear when you reach a particular threshold of this entire area. And when you do reach that threshold, she's going to try to break down the door that is to your left. You need to run past her. You need to get inside of the barn, plant the hook, open it, and get out of there. It is very simple. She doesn't even run towards you. It's meant to convey that she's closing in on you, but the developers do that a lot with these kind of games, where they mislead you with the audio. And I'm even going to demonstrate that Marta's not even running towards me, she's just walking. See? She's just walking. And I'm just going to be able to get under here very quickly. She's going to try to pull me out, but Blake is going to be able to fight her off, and this does not feel like a lucky pass moment. If only the other moments where Blake was in these kind of moments didn't feel like lucky passes, then maybe this game wouldn't feel so much like a horror simulator. But sadly, that is what they opted for. Fuck. But that was actually the second to last encounter with Marta, and then she appears out of nowhere in Chapter 5 at the very end, and she's the final enemy you have to deal with. Yeah. Can you remember when I said that this game had pacing issues? It's stuff like that that really makes you question, why they were thinking that this was good. You know another example that comes to mind? At the beginning of the game, when you go through your first school sequence, and you go back into reality and you're with Ethan, why is it placed there at that particular point in the game? You know, such safe haven moments where the game is trying to give you a breather from all the horror only work when you've experienced enough horror in the game. But because it's introduced so early on into the game, when you haven't even experienced the full percentage of horror in this game, that it just comes across as being out of place, and it just comes across as being a very jarring experience, and I don't appreciate it whatsoever, and I don't respect it for what it is. So all that section really does for me is just make me get frustrated that I'm not playing the game, that I'm having to sit through another unskippable moment that just takes up too much time, and it should have been placed better, or just made shorter. You know, I don't think the developers truly understand what makes these safe haven moments impactful in these kind of survival horror games. And it's quite ironic because Outlast 1 did have moments that felt like they were placed perfectly. Like, you know a section that comes to mind in Outlast 1? You know how after you do Dr. Traeger's section, you get inside of that burning cafeteria, and it comes across as being a very sorrowful experience because you're seeing that patient like inside of the cafeteria accepting his fate and just wanting to just get out of the asylum by any means necessary. You know, I thought that was a very good choice for pacing, but why did they make this kind of mistake in this game? And another thing I really don't like about the pacing on this game is the school sequences. I really feel like the school sequences on this game only serve to just interrupt the main story of the game that you're actually invested in, and all they do is just completely show that there really isn't a story in Outlast 2. The whole story of Outlast 2 is just one big Murkoff experiment, and Blake is unfortunately one of the test subjects involved in this experiment without his knowledge. And this is further reinforced by the fact that Murkoff are just indirectly referenced in the game via a document that you get in Chapter 3, and also that you can see a tower in the distance, and that's what's actually emitting the pulse that is causing everyone to be crazy. And I just don't really understand what they were trying to go for with that, because if the whole entire story of Outlast 2 is pointless, then why do you even bother trying to waste time putting us in school sequences that don't aid in any kind of establishment of core story values that the Outlast series is trying to go for? And it's the same with the characters. The way the characters are introduced in this game and the way they're utilized throughout the full entire game, it just doesn't feel right. Like with Lynn, how can you feel any kind of attachment to Lynn when you barely see her throughout the full game? You know, but by the time you get to chapter 5 and you just hear her being like attacked by the heretics, like how can you feel any kind of emotional impact from her? It's the same with Jessica, only with Jessica it's even worse, because Jessica is just reduced to being a tool to introduce jump scares, a concept that's already overused way too much in this game. And if it's overused so much in this game, then therefore it has no value, and therefore Jessica has absolutely no value. And I don't know why they had to reduce her to just being a tool, and it makes the ending of the game completely unsatisfactory, because that whole point where Blake is just praying with Jessica, how can you possibly care about her when she's been reduced to an annoying tool for jump scares? I just don't get it whatsoever. They made a lot of mistakes with Outlast 2, you know, with the villains. Like, Father Knott's introduced in one sequence and you don't see him throughout the full game, and then Marta appears in Chapter 1, and then she's just randomly back in Chapter 5 trying to kill you despite the electrical storm that's happening outside. There's no sense to the pacing on this game, and it's what brings this game's quality down when it comes to its story. And as I mentioned before, there isn't a story in this game. If Outlast 2 didn't exist whatsoever, the story of the Outlast series would not have been impacted in the slightest in any way that was negative. Everything you do in this game is just completely isolated from the main Outlast universe. It almost makes me question what point it has in the continuity of the Outlast series. And that's yet again another reason why I don't feel like this game is very good compared to, you know, the first Outlast and Outlast the Whistleblower. And there's a lot more things I would like to voice when it comes to my critique of Outlast 2, but it's gonna have to wait right now because we're on Chapter 2, and Chapter 2 is one of the worst chapters on this game because the encounters with the enemies are really bad, specifically with Nick and Laird, because Nick and Laird are very omniscient AI. They have the ability to fire infinite arrows at you, and the arrows can actually turn in midair, so dodging them is almost impossible because of some really stupid artificial handicaps like that. And there's just a lot of cutscenes in these kind of chapters that just take up so much of the gameplay. And the chapter select system for Chapter 2 is awful because the main chapter checkpoints that they give you for Chapter 2, they place you before very long cutscenes. You know, trying to replay Golgotha, which is that chapter that begins with Blake being hung on that cross. The checkpoint for that chapter is before the 5-minute long cutscene where you have to watch Blake being hung on that cross. Why? What is that cutscene serving other than to showcase mindless violence, and it has no kind of impact on the main storyline whatsoever? Why are you forcing the player to go through that cutscene every time they want to replay that chapter? It demonstrates a level of arrogance in the developers when they're forcing you to try to appreciate the art. That's all I really view those cutscenes as, and all the cutscenes in the Outlast series serve to do is just serve as loading screens. You think I'm going to treat these cutscenes with any respect when I'm going to be forced to go through them every time? Like, you're forced to go through loading screens a lot whenever you're trying to play a game, and that is exactly what I would equate these cutscenes with, loading screens. But thankfully, I am not showing the game any respect, and I've trimmed out that whole entire cutscene. I'm only showcasing this one right here, which just seems very silly to me that Blake is able to dislodge his right hand when his right hand was nailed at least 6 times, compared to his left hand, which was only nailed like 2 times. And now you're finally in control of Blake, and we now have to bandage his hands. And also, for the very first encounter with Nick and Laird, where I just ran right past them, you have to hug the left-hand side so that they don't shoot you immediately, and they will always hit you, but it doesn't kill you. I don't know why that is the case, but I'm really glad that it works like that. And Chapter 2 was definitely impacted a lot by the patches, because they removed a lot of really dumb moments from Chapter 2. Like, in that first encounter with Nick and Laird, they removed some enemies so that you're not getting caught by them every time you're trying to run away from Nick and Laird. And then, I think they've actually, taken away some enemies from this encounter right here, so you're not having to deal with so many enemies, and it makes this encounter very fair. But you need to crouch over here and pick up the bandages. That guy right there, you gotta be very careful of him, and make sure you don't step on him, otherwise he will get alerted. And this is actually a stealth encounter, and it's a stealth encounter you definitely want to do stealthily. You know, there's only like 2 encounters in the game where I really feel like it's best to do them stealthily, because they flow really nicely. This is one of them, and then the other one is in Chapter 5 when you're trying to escape from Val in that half-flooded area. But once you've bandaged yourself, go inside of this log. Do not go prone before going inside of this log. For some reason, if you're prone before going inside of this log, the game will force you to stand up. So you have to make sure you're crouched before actually going into this log, because the game will automatically put you in prone, which is what's supposed to happen. And now we're just going to run past these enemies. And then I'm going to be demonstrating some dodges on the enemies, because this is really where I actually get the opportunity to use the dodge system to a better degree compared to Chapter 1. And I'm going to use it on this guy coming up. So the way the slide dodge works is you need to make sure you have enough momentum so that you can press circle at the right moment, where if you press it early, while you're still in the animation of sliding, the enemies will interpret your hitbox as being in a standing position, so they'll try to swipe at you from like chest height, but they can't hit you because you're on the ground. And oh, no, never mind. I don't demonstrate it here. I just run past this guy because he was very slow to come at me. So I think I demonstrated somewhere else. I actually demonstrated it on that first part of Chapter 2, where I got past that one guy who was near the campsite. He can be very annoying because he's always programmed to jog. And timing your slide dodge can be pretty difficult. But this is another change that they made to Chapter 2. Normally, Nick and Laird would be in a moment where they just shoot a guy and then they just start walking, but they removed that sequence. It's completely gone, and I'm really glad that's the case, because they can actually spot you from below whenever you try to climb up that tree. But instead, they're reserved for this spot over here. And you need to wait underwater for a very long time. You can hold your breath for at least like 20 seconds. And you'll know when you need to resurface when you see the second set of bubbles. So right now, I believe the first set of bubbles should be appearing. Yep, there it is. There's the first set of bubbles. And then the second set of bubbles should be occurring in a moment. But it doesn't matter, because Nick and Laird will have already left. They'll have their backs to you when you resurface. So there we go. And then your camcorder is going to be inside of this building. And once you pick up the camcorder, you're going to go into a school sequence. And that's another thing I don't understand about the school sequences. Why is it that the school sequences can trigger without the pulse happening? Like, what exactly is happening to Blake in reality while he's in these school sequences? And why aren't the enemies trying to attack him when he's in these hallucination moments? Fuck. And furthermore, how is it that when Blake is in these hallucination sequences, he's always moving towards the mines, which is his objective in order to get to Lynn? It just seems very convenient, because I remember there's a note that you could pick up in Outlast 2, which I believe says that the Testament of New Ezekiel has been trying to escape the island, or at least some of the members, and each time they have tried to leave the island, or get closer to the tower that is emitting these pulses, it keeps causing them to go backwards when they're in those hallucination sequences. It doesn't make any sense. And yet somehow Blake is not experiencing that kind of problem. He's constantly moving towards the tower because the mines just happen to be in the path towards the tower. It just seems so odd that it works like that. And once again, the school sequences don't make any sense in this game. We're currently dealing with Father Ludermelch, who is very easy to get past. It's all entirely rigid in how it's designed. They want you to go down this one path, and it's all incredibly simple. But this part right here, this is one of my least favorite parts of Chapter 2 by far, because Nick and Laird are so omniscient. Like, they can somehow go inside that house right in front of me, conveniently, and just spot me. So instead of going inside that house, what I'm doing here is I'm going to this side of the area, and I'm just going prone so that they don't spot me, and I'm just going to keep watch over where they are. And I have to let Nick and Laird do their thing, unfortunately, because there's no kind of distraction mechanic on this game. It's just a waiting game with the stealth on this game, and it just leads to a lot of impatience. And I really don't like doing stealth in this part. It just wastes too much time. But you have to do it. Like, the sequence where you have to bandage your hands, and then the sequence in Chapter 5 where you have to use stealth against Val, I felt like it was justified as to why you needed to do stealth. But this part right here, you shouldn't have to do stealth for a really stupid reason where Nick and Laird are just so omniscient. And I'm just watching them right now. They're always going to be like right near that side of the area because they're always going to be blocking the exit, and you just have to wait for them to move. You can use the microphone to track their positions, but you can clearly see that they're right there. So I'm just waiting for them to go off to the left, and then at some point I'm going to stand up. It's because they're going to turn around very quickly because they pretty omniscient AI. Watch out for that barbed wire right there. Do you see that? That is a tripwire. It's to stop you whenever you try to run towards it. You have to make sure you crouch under it or just go around it. But once you get over here, you're safe. Although I have had moments where they have been able to shoot me when I'm over here, so you still have to be very careful when you're getting onto this ledge. I could have probably used the trick for moving faster on ledges, but that's very risky when you're doing this particular sequence because it's very easy to fall off. And if you're not too sure what I mean when I say a trick, there is a trick that you can do in Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC, and also in this game, where if you sprint towards a ledge that forces you to move sideways, and you hold the button that allows you to look behind you while you're sprinting, you can bypass that animation and you can pretty much run very fast on the ledge. And it's a really useful trick. It's something that speedrunners do a lot, and I do it as well because it helps save a lot of time. Now, this part right here, Nick and Laird are going to be shooting you, so you're going to have to wait for your stamina to regenerate, and then you're going to need to make your move. Watch out for any cacti on the ground, they will damage you. And then this part right here, there's going to be a guy behind you, and he's going to try to grab you, and you're going to shake him off, and then he's going to start chasing you. And then, once you've done this sequence, there's going to be another lucky pass moment where, for some reason, Nick and Laird bury Blake under like 6 inches of dirt, and Blake is therefore able to escape. Why would they do that? Why on earth would they bury him under 6 inches of dirt? And that just allows Blake to easily get away. It's so silly. Like, look at that. How am I supposed to be afraid when he's going to be able to get away that easily? It's impossible to provide any kind of justification as to why Blake was able to escape so easily. All because Nick and Laird were idiots. Like, that just seems like a coincidence. I mean, I suppose you could probably make the argument of, oh, they probably made it like that just so that Blake could actually complete his ascension into the Skull Messiah. Maybe Nick and Laird intentionally buried them under like 6 inches of dirt just so he can complete that ascension, but I don't think that is the case. These guys are too devoted to their fate to try to cheat like that. Whatever, let's just move past them. There were 4 crawlers just then. They're very easy to get past. Hug the left-hand side, then kind of move back to the right, and then move back to the left. It's simple. And now we have this sequence coming up where you need to gain access to that noose that guy used in order to hang himself so that you can get out of here. And you need to make sure you have a full stamina bar when you do this sequence, because there are a couple of enemies patrolling, but they never seem to detect you if you're fast. And I always try to hug the left-hand side whenever I'm trying to make my way over to the noose. And then I take the exact same path again as I'm backtracking in order to avoid Nick and Laird. And I believe they actually patched this section so that Nick and Laird don't immediately shoot you whenever you start running. Like, they really toned down Nick and Laird's aggressiveness on this section, and it makes this section a lot better in its design. But also, something I forgot to mention, always make sure you go into the settings and enable easy QTE or whatever that setting is, because it allows you to not have to press the correct button to do the QTEs. So I believe right there it was giving me the option to press square, but I was pressing some other button in order to do the quick time event. Same case here. You want to get rid of these 2 enemies so that they don't try to grab you when you're making your way back over to where you're supposed to use the rope. And the rope is right up here. There is going to be a guy patrolling, and he's going to be patrolling rather close to you, so you need to gain access to the noose very quickly before he has a chance to spot you. If he spots you, you're going to have to dodge him, and it requires some strict timing, because he's very quick to close the distance towards you while you're in the animation. And the noose is going to be right over here. Nick and Laird will spawn once I pick up the noose, and I'm just going to backtrack the way I came. And I'm going to actually demonstrate the slide dodge in this part, because there's always going to be one guy that seems to be in front of you every single time you take this path. And you have to use the slide dodge if you want to get past him and maintain all that momentum, because if you're too slow, Nick and Laird will kill you. So there's that guy, and I've successfully done the slide dodge. You have to really make sure you recover from the animation quickly, otherwise he'll turn around and attack you very fast. But now we're just going to skip on to Chapter 3, which is a chapter that should have been shortened and trimmed to such a degree that it actually makes it tolerable to play, because this chapter is honestly the worst chapter on this game, more so than Chapter 2. Like, Chapter 2 embraces a lot of bullcrap with its enemy designs, and with the fact that it puts you in a lot of long cutscenes that are completely pointless, but this one, you're not even going to be dealing with any bullcrap from the enemies, because there's no enemies you're dealing with that are actually important. And then it all feels like one long cutscene with the way they decided to implement this chapter. For the most part, when it comes to the encounters in Chapter 3, there's only 4 encounters, and they do not demand anything of you whatsoever. A toddler could easily do these encounters. And this encounter right here, you need to trigger Father Ludomilch so that he's down there, then you need to mantle over that railing, and it's going to cause him to spawn above you, then you need to drop down, get past him, and that's the end of that encounter. And then you go down here, there's another encounter with Father Ludomilch, where the only thing that the game demands of you at this point is just to run in a straight line. He's going to be right behind you, you just go up a ladder, and that's the end of that encounter. And then you need to waste time doing a sequence that honestly should not even be in the game. I honestly consider it to be one of the worst parts of the game, because all we're going to be doing is playing Follow the Leader with Jessica, because what you're doing is you're sitting in the dark with your camcorder out, with your microphone enabled, so that you can actually triangulate on Jessica's source, and she constantly moves around all the time, and it makes the sequence drag on for such a long time, and it's just very inconsistent with the time it takes to do it, because there are times when you can get it done very fast, but then there are other times where it takes forever, and I unfortunately got the latter case. It's just so unnecessary. Why the heck do you waste the player's time trying to find a jump scare? This is why you don't make jump scares triggers for scripted moments that allow the game to progress. It's such design choices like these that really put you off playing this game, and it's why Insane Difficulty has little to no replayability whatsoever when you're having to sit through all these long cutscenes, all these moments where you're just walking all over the place, and moments like that where you're just having to search for a jump scare. It's a waste of time. It's an absolute waste of time. It's practically an interactive cutscene at that point, and it can easily be compared to Sherry's section from Resident Evil 2 Remake, because all Sherry's section was in Resident Evil 2 Remake was just a boring change to the gameplay style that did nothing to change the gameplay in a way that made it very intriguing or very interesting. That whole entire sequence was honestly the biggest waste of time ever in Claire's campaign of Resident Evil 2 Remake, and the fact that you couldn't skip it whatsoever just really pissed me off to no end. And you know a game that does it so much better? Resident Evil 7, because on Resident Evil 7, when you were in the Mia videotape, it worked off the exact same designs as Sherry's section for Resident Evil 2 Remake, where you're just having to wait for this enemy to do its scripted path so that you can eventually make the right move in order to get past them. But that whole entire videotape sequence was reserved for first-time players, and it was entirely optional, so you didn't have to deal with it in subsequent playthroughs afterwards. Why it wasn't the same case in Resident Evil 2 Remake when it came to Sherry's section is beyond me. The designs they opted for in Resident Evil 2 Remake put Resident Evil 2 Remake at a level of quality that is very inferior to Resident Evil 7's level of quality. And just going back to what I was talking about with making this analogy, why is it that when it comes to those kind of sequences, they have to make it mandatory? Why do they bother putting in player agency? Why can they not just make it a cutscene that you can skip? In fact, why make any of the cutscenes unskippable? I really don't understand whatsoever. But unfortunately, the boring designs of Chapter 3 are returning in this really pointless mechanic, which is the raft. And I have trimmed out a vast majority of Chapter 3 where you're just piloting this raft, and the raft is so poorly controlled on this game. I get moments where I get stuck a lot, and it just doesn't turn very well. It's so rigid in its controls. You don't even have to paddle forward. The current takes you most of the time, and even if I was to paddle, it wouldn't offer up that much of a speed boost. It's just so pathetic of a gameplay mechanic. It's just completely unnecessary. This whole entire chapter is unnecessary. I would have rather had chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 be the full game, and just have chapter 3 last for about 5 minutes. That's how I would have made this. I've skipped on ahead again, and we now have another encounter, and we're being introduced to a new enemy type, which are the heretics. And the heretics are introduced in this part of chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5. And they will be the primary antagonists of these chapters. That sequence then was very easy, and now we have this school sequence coming up where it is so simple. All you need to do is turn around and just start swimming. You don't even need a night vision for this. I mean, I do use the night vision near the end because I thought I was facing the wall in a weird way that I wouldn't be able to get the mantle detection, so I had to use the night vision to correct for that, but I didn't need to. And what I'm doing right now is I'm sprinting, and I'm also mashing X at the same time, so that I can always ensure I'm going to initiate the mantle animation while I'm sprinting. And that is the end of that sequence. And once you've done all the prior sequences of Chapter 3, the rest of this is very simple, because even though Father Lulumilch is a threat in this area, he is not a problem whatsoever, because he's just very rigid in how he's designed. Because of the fact that he can kill you instantly, the game is forcing you down this one path, and getting past him is so easy. And here's some very odd scripting. You have to open that door in order to trigger Jessica to spawn, and have more of these stupid moments where Jessica is trying to incite terror, but all you're really thinking of is just how silly her scream sounds, and how her scream has just gotten so annoying at this point that you really can't find any terror from her whatsoever. Yeah. What a waste of a character. And what a waste of a story. Like, I would have rather taken a more fleshed out and properly detailed narrative involving Murkoff and have encounters with the other enemies than just have my time wasted doing all these stupid school sequences and attempting to establish background on a main character who is honestly the most generic character ever when it comes to your cliched horror protagonist. Like, he doesn't feel any different to Miles or Waylon. I mean, the only thing that's different is that he actually talks. Because this is the first time in the Outlast series the main character actually talks, which is very funny that they decided to go for that. Only the dialogue that Blake gives is just completely pointless, and it doesn't offer any kind of clarification as to certain plot details of the game. And the only time Blake ever gives any kind of clarification is in Chapter 3 when he's on the raft, and he's talking about what the so-called good Christians want, and also what the heretics want, and that's the only form of clarification he gives. Other than that, there's really no need for his dialogue. But that is the end of Chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Outlast 2, and that is the end of Part 1. Stay tuned for the future part. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.